Hello everybody, we are continuing my little mini series on mid-engine Ferrari V8s, and today we have this, the F430, kindly loaned to me by Aldous from AV Engineering. Now at a quick glance, the 430 would appear very much like a facelifted 360, and in simple terms, that's exactly what it is. It's got pretty much the same chassis and a clear evolution of the same styling. However, when Ferrari do a facelift, they don't do it like normal companies. You see, most manufacturers do facelifts with a step like this, but when Ferrari do it, it's a step like that. So, what makes the 430 so different? In 2003, Lamborghini burst into the junior supercar segment with the amazing Gallardo. Its 5-litre V10 completely outgunned Ferrari's 360. But the Modenese firm were not going to be caught sleeping. They had a plan, you see. And as with all Ferraris, the 430's big changes start at the back. Out went the old 360's Dino-based V8, which could trace its roots all the way back to the 308. And in its place was this genuinely all-new 4.3-litre engine, putting out 490 horsepower and 343 pound-foot of torque. The 5-valve per cylinder layout was replaced with a slightly more conventional 4-valve per cylinder layout, but to make up for the losses, it got a very trick variable timing system, which was still reasonably fancy back in the day. This engine shares some of its architecture with the Maserati 4.2-litre V8, which had a cross-plane crank in it, and the Enzo's V12. One of the features Ferrari are most proud of with the 430 was the introduction of the E differential. Taken from their Formula 1 cars, it's a clever system of solenoids and friction plates which allows them to control exactly how much the rear will lock up, meaning that you can get the most power to the ground at all times. The 430 is also responsible for introducing an iconic piece of modern Ferrari design. This little fellow, the Manettino switch. It gave you control over the car's different driving modes. Back in 2005, something fairly revolutionary. So much so that even the Enzo that came out a couple of years earlier didn't have one. You got 5 different settings: ice, slippery conditions, sport, race, and traction off. And they changed the parameters of the E differential, in this car the gearbox, and also the throttle. And they mean that you can drive this car all year round in relative confidence. Now, the overall feeling of this interior is one of real luxury. This car has the optional leather rear, so the firewall is completely covered in lovely decal. And I've got to say, it's marvellous. There isn't an awful lot of spec in this car, actually. Like 90% of UK supplied 430s, it had the F1 gearbox, here a little bit better than in the 360s, but it really does feel a step up in terms of quality. This car has leather on everything with a bit of carbon fibre here and there, and it's all soft to the touch and it feels genuinely premium. Yes, there are still a few sticky switches in 430s, but honestly, it's easy to sort, and this car does feel proper Italian supercar. Even if you do recognise a few things from the 550, which by this stage was a decade old, like these indicator stalks and the door release handles. But hey, it's Ferrari. I forgive them. Like most great sports cars, the 430's design is a result of both artistry and technical development. Take these wing mirrors, for example. You have the F430 logo stamped onto just one of them. And here, the stalk is split in two, because when they looked at a 360 in a wind tunnel, they realised that the wing mirror was interrupting the airflow to the air vent here. So that's why the Challenge Stradale mirrors are so thin on the stalk, and these are bisected. It means that the car can get a little bit more air fed into its engine. And the whole package produces 50% more downforce than the 360, with no more drag. In fact, at 186 miles an hour, 10 short of its top speed, this will produce nearly 300 kilos of downforce. It's got a top speed of 196 and will do 0 to 62 in 4 seconds flat. With examples of the 430 on the used market from less than £70,000, it will make an excellent candidate for your very first Ferrari. However, these aren't quite as bulletproof as some other models, so I would highly recommend getting any potential purchase pre-inspected by someone like Aldous from AV Engineering, who's kindly supplied his own personal car to me. And because it's his very own car, this one isn't entirely standard. The discs have been lifted directly from a 430 Challenge race car. Now, they should go with centre lock wheels, but he instead is running these Scuderia items. So to make the two work together, he's created his own custom carriers out of titanium. And at the back, the pesky original manifolds have been replaced with racing items, making the car sound a bit fruitier and giving it a healthy dose more power. In fact, combined with his custom map for this car, we reckon it's not putting out 490 horsepower anymore, but closer to 550. And he's lent it to me for the entire week with only one condition: that I have to drive it properly. It has been, I'll confess, a very frustrating week with the 430. Every single time I've wanted to use it, it's been cold, wet, dark, raining, or a combination of all of the above. And then today we finally have a glimpse of sunlight, and I seem for the last 2 hours to have found every single closed road and piece of traffic in East Anglia that there is to find. But at last, I have had a chance to stretch the car's legs and can now deliver something of a verdict. The 430 certainly has many strengths. Naturally, it being a Ferrari, those include the engine, which even in standard form is very punchy, and here is downright unreasonable. Now, it doesn't have the ludicrous low-down pull of some of Ferrari's own V12 units, but at everything from 3 to 8,500 RPM, this thing is savage. It comes onto a sort of second wind as it gets halfway between those 2 points and pulls really hard right to that red line. I've got to say, it sounds damn good. Not quite the musical instrument that a 355 is, but far less monotone than some later cars like the 488 or the Roma. It's so flexible and tractable that it doesn't really matter all that much which gear you're in as long as you're vaguely right. The suspension's also really quite well set up. In the regular F430, you do not have the option of separating the powertrain and suspension mode. That was introduced for the Scud. That being said, even in its most aggressive setting, this is still a car which is very well suited to British tarmac. It floats down the road reasonably well, and at anything above sort of 20 miles an hour, actually a very comfortable car. It really is an extraordinary place to be too. The view out the front is magnificent, and these seats are absolutely fantastic. Yes, I'm sure the hardcore driver, and people like myself, would probably much prefer the buckets, but honestly, there is absolutely nothing wrong with these. I'm also somewhat adapting to the F1 gearbox, although in these early cars it's far from perfect. Later ones did get a much improved system which had better clutch engagement, but apparently there's no easy way of upgrading this to that. It can be done, but the cost involved would probably be more than actually just buying a later car. As with all of these systems, if you want the smoothest of rides, just lift a little when you're changing up. It's the downshifts that disappoint a little bit in here, because I really had hoped they would be just a little bit easier, a little bit better, and a little bit smoother. Generally speaking, the harder you drive the car, the better and the happier that the gearbox gets. I have had the pleasure of driving a manual 430, and in all honesty, if I could have whatever I wanted, that would be it. It's a really, genuinely very nice gearbox, but here the F1 is almost as good as they got. One thing the Manatino does not control is the exhaust valve, which is something of an annoyance because I would really like a secret mode in this car to just quieten it a little bit. When we're doing drive-bys and things, I know you guys love the sound of a 4.3 litre flat plane crank V8 at full chat. Sadly, the people who live along the roads that I drive do not. It being Italian, there are of course some quirks. If you're trying to maneuver the car, you do have to exercise some caution, because when you press the reverse button, you need to wait just a few seconds for it to actually engage, otherwise the car will stay in first. And when you are then in reverse, it will beep at you. Not because it has parking sensors, but because it is in reverse. And I'm sure that's led to one or two very expensive misunderstandings. The best way to park this car is to look through the back, and actually just behind the engine you can see the little clear piece of grille at the back, or with the wire mesh over it. So if you're reversing up to a wall, that is the back of the car, and you've actually got a pretty good idea of how close you are to anything behind you, so long as it's more than about 3 feet tall. Visibility is generally excellent, certainly by supercar standards. Not quite as good as the 355, but very good all round. In terms of practicality, the boot up front is actually very generously sized. I've got all of my camera kit in there and a car cover. The petrol tank's a reasonable capacity too, about 95 litres, meaning you can actually get quite a few miles between fill-ups, provided that you're driving relatively sensibly. That being said, driving sensibly isn't something that always comes very easily when a car sounds quite this good. However, there is one thing that will temper your excitement in this car, and it's a familiar foe in many a Ferrari. It's not actually the brakes in this one, because they are spectacular. Those challenge ceramics you'd expect to be all aggressive and hardcore and very bitey, but actually they're not. They're smooth, they're compliant, they're quiet, they're certainly effective, and they really are a highlight on this car. Very surprised at that. No, this car's failing is the steering. Once again, it's that which lets the Ferrari down. When you're at low speeds, it feels a touch slow and unresponsive, but that soon cures itself once you get up to about 50 or 60 mile an hour. It sometimes waits up and other times doesn't. It's a really frustrating helm to use. I have faith in the car, but not confidence. It doesn't talk to you in the way that a McLaren does, a Porsche would, or perhaps even some of Ferrari's own other cars. A 348 steering is actually far superior to this. The wheel itself is really quite nice to hold, and the car doesn't really seem to have that much in the way of traction issues, despite the fact that many of the roads I've been driving on have been covered in mud and water and everything else you can imagine. It's done a really good job, and as an all-round daily driver, I can see why people would use an F430. But when it comes to enjoying your favourite road, it's just missing that little element. And I'm really not quite sure how you would actually improve it. It's a frustrating item to be missing on a car like this. It makes the noise, it can talk the talk, but if you're a real serious driving enthusiast, I don't think the 430 is probably the car for you. I'm in two minds as to whether it would be the car for me. I can really very easily picture one of these sat on the driveway next to the 550. Don't know how I'd actually afford to make that a reality, but it's a lovely idea, and I've really enjoyed having it for the week. So Aldous, thank you so much. For £70,000, if you want a supercar with more driver involvement and interaction, McLaren 570S is gonna be a better car. Of course, it brings with it its own issues, and this as an experience is far superior. To run and to own, the Ferrari really is a very good thing. If you have been daydreaming and looking through the classifieds, one thing I would say to you is don't actually let the F1 box put you off. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a serious premium you're going to pay to get a manual car. And honestly, with just a little bit of experience, you can learn to use this and enjoy it. The later cars will be better, and the Scuderia, of course, better again, but that is a very different animal. And I can't help but wonder if, on the road, actually, this is probably the better car. Maybe the Scud fixes my issues with the steering, and one day I hope to be able to find out. But for now, the 430 as a supercar for £70,000, it's nearly everything right. Unfortunately for me, I do place a lot of value in steering feedback and feel. Being a Lotus fanatic will rather spoil you in that department. But otherwise, I've really enjoyed my time with this car. Thank you everyone for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already. See you all for the next one. Bye bye.